Thank, thank you. Welcome to our live webinar. I am Betty Kappa, the president of the French American Chamber of Commerce, French American Business Council of West Florida here in Tampa Bay, and we help business owners networking and grow their business here in the Tampa Bay area. So welcome to this webinar. It's very exciting today because we are going to talk about real estate and especially about leasing with our my friend also Felix Montanez. So thank you, Felix, to be here. So I have a little bio that I'm going to read. So here, Felix Montanez is a board certified real estate attorney by the Florida Bar and is licensed to practice in all Florida state courts, as well as the United States District Court for the Middle District of Florida. He's the founder of the Montanez Law Firm, which focuses on real estate transactions, litigation, as well as business law. Mr. Montanez has over a decade of experience representing clients in a wide range of real estate matters, including title services, land trust, foreclosures, evictions, quiet title actions, partition, and commercial leasing. His practice combines both transactional and litigation expertise, providing clients with comprehensive counsel throughout the life cycle of a real estate matter. Prior to founding the firm in 2015, Mr. Montanez was an associate at the Ticktin Law Group, where he concentrated on real estate and business litigation. He earned his Master of Laws in taxation from the University of Florida, Levin College of Law, where he focused his studies on tax litigation, corporate taxation, partnership taxation, and estate and gift taxation. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Central Florida and graduated magna cum laude from Ave Maria School of Law. Originally from Orlando, Mr. Montanez resides in Tampa with his beautiful wife and adorable two sons. Well, thank you, Felix, to be here with us, and it's welcome again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. I have a slideshow which I'm gonna go through, and I'm happy to share it with anyone. I'll put my email in the end if you want to send me your information. I could just get you a copy of the slideshow, and I'll also put it on my website. Just to get started, so introduction, Betty already kind of went through my personal bio, so I won't go through it again. She did a good job. I guess just to reiterate, I am a board certified real estate attorney in the state of Florida. So my presentation today is kind of Florida centric. At the end, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. So yeah, let's go ahead. Let's jump right into it. The topics I wanted to discuss for today are different real estate investment options in Florida. Like from a legal perspective, what's the difference? What are the pros and cons of each? So I will talk about residential rentals. That's probably the most common type of investment in Florida. Commercial rentals. I'll talk about the eviction process. It's pretty similar for both residential and commercial. I'll talk about 1031 exchanges. It's a tax deferral tool to help investors. And I'll also talk about vacation rentals like Airbnbs and things like that. What are the rules regarding that? And I concentrate, it really in Florida, you'll see it varies a lot by county to county and municipality to municipality. So I'll kind of concentrate on the Tampa Bay area where I'm located, but happy to look up the rules in another county if anyone is interested in that. So the first type of investment I'm talking about is single family homes. That's the most common in the most common investment. Someone's getting into real estate and investing here in Florida. That's the most common. Generally, the leases are short for 1 year or less. There's a lot of we'll go through the eviction process a little bit later. In Florida, it's relatively friendly. It's a landlord friendly state compared to other states. The eviction process, for example, takes around 30 days, but those rules only apply to rentals under 1 year. So from a practical standpoint, all residential rentals, or the great majority of residential rentals in Florida, are on 1 year lease terms. And one aspect about residential rentals, which is different from the other side, from the business rentals, is that residential rentals are heavily regulated in terms of what the landlord has to provide, what maintenance they have to provide. Generally, the state sets a minimum standard that landlords must set for residential rentals. They don't want slumlords, for example. So the landlord, no matter what the contract says, is responsible for a minimum amount of maintenance for the properties. Generally, they have to keep them up to code. Yes, so the pros of getting into a residential rental: one, it's easier to lease. It's a lot easier to find a tenant that fits that area. It's kind of a entry level investment in terms of the initial cost to get into residential. Generally, is going to be less than commercial, and there's consistent demand. The unfortunate part about it is that there's higher turnover. Because the leases are generally 1 year, you could have a tenant that keeps renewing their lease, and that's often the best case scenario. But they don't have to. You could be looking for a new tenant every single year. Another con as an investor is that the tenant protections are strong. There's the statute sets, like I said, minimum standards for maintenance to the landlord, and also there's rules about terminating the lease and things like that. And also, it requires more hands-on management than commercial properties generally do. The eviction process for residential and for commercial, it's relatively the same. This is always a topic that comes up when people are considering residential rentals. And what happens if things go wrong? What happens if the tenant doesn't pay or they violate the lease in some other way? What's the process? That's the good news in terms of Florida. And Florida, I have many clients that are landlords are going through the eviction process, and they often complain that it takes too long and that it's difficult and things like that. But Florida is way better than most other states. It's really one of the best. Like I said before, generally the process for an eviction in Florida takes around 30 days. In terms of cost, it'll vary from firm to firm, and some landlords try to do it without an attorney, but generally my office charges a $2,000 flat fee case to handle the entire eviction process. Again, compared to other states, the costs are relatively low. And then the steps, I kind of outlined the entire eviction process. I'll just kind of go over it briefly. Like I said, it takes 30 days. So for an eviction for non-payment of rent, which is the most common, the landlord has to give the tenant a 3 business day notice. And after that notice expires, then the landlord can file the lawsuit. The landlord would then have to get summonses. They'll have to have the tenant served with the lawsuit. And once the tenants are served, they have 5 business days to file a response. And importantly, one peculiar aspect of Florida law is that the tenant has to put the money that is due in the rent into the registry of the court. If they want to fight the case, they have to put the money that's due into the registry of the court. If they fail to respond to the complaint, or if they fail to put the money that's due in the registry of the court, then the landlord can get a default judgment. So they can get a judgment without having to go to a hearing in front of the court. It could be all just upon written submissions. If a judgment is received, then the clerk of court will give us a document called a writ of possession, and we'll generally take that to the sheriff. The sheriff charges $90. And they will go out to the property. They'll put a notice on the property giving the tenant 24 to 48 hours to leave. And then the sheriff will meet the landlord at the property to give them possession of the property. So that whole process is generally takes around 30 days. If you hire a law firm like mine, we would do all of these things for you. You don't have to know the individual steps, but that's why it takes 30 days, because there's a lot of kind of hoops, a lot of steps to jump through. So now turning over to commercial rentals. For example, commercial would be like an office, retail, industrial, medical, all those things are considered commercial. Basically, anything that's not residential would be a commercial space. Generally, they're longer leases. You could have leases that last decades long, but often longer than a year. And there's a lot less regulation in terms of what's required from the landlord. Almost everything is based on what the contract says. If the contract says the tenant's responsible for certain things, they're responsible for certain things. The statute doesn't interfere with the contract much. The so the pros of commercial leases: one is it's generally a stable income, because the leases are for higher are for longer terms, and also generally they're higher end. They're the rents are on average higher than they would be in residentials. I'll talk about it more, but in a commercial lease, different than a residential lease, a lot of the costs associated with the properties are shifted over to the tenants. The tenant, that triple N, it's called triple net lease. There's a type of lease in Florida, which is very common, where the tenant is responsible for a lot of the costs dealing with the property. For example, property taxes, the landlord's insurance costs, everything the landlord has to pay for the property could be shifted to the tenant, and that's all based on whatever the contract says. The the cons of investing in commercial lease property is generally there's a higher vacancy risk. It's not as it's not as in demand as residential would be. It's costlier to acquire, and it's generally more sensitive to economic cycles. Um, I wanted to go through with a little bit more detail some of the different types of commercial leases that they have. I'll just so the one I just touched on briefly, called the triple net lease. In that lease, the tenant is responsible for all the operating expenses of the landlord. In a commercial space, you might have multiple multiple units in one building, so the tenants will generally share the operating expenses of the building. Could include property taxes and whatever the landlord spends to maintain the common area. That's called common area maintenance. So the tenant would be responsible for all of that. And the, the opposite of that is a what they call a full service lease, which is a little bit more similar to a residential lease, in that the tenant just pays one amount of rent, and that covers everything. It includes all the operating expenses for the property. It could also include utilities and janitorial services. And like I said, that's kind of all based on the contract. And the third main type of lease is called a modified gross lease. That's kind of an in between. Some things are triple net, some things are covered by the landlord, and that's all kind of negotiated in the contract. One part of commercial leases that I wanted to highlight as well is that generally sales tax is due on the rent. Generally, the tenant would be responsible for the sales tax, but it's important for the landlord to know that they have to report they have to collect and remit those sales taxes to the state, because they're all ultimately responsible for them. And then in terms of maintenance responsibilities, so in most commercial leases, the landlord will generally be responsible for the shell. They call it the shell of the building, the roof, the exterior walls, and anything inside the building the tenant would be responsible for. That is the norm, but that is not always the case. You can negotiate it any way you want. The landlord could make the tenant responsible for the roof. They could make them responsible for the exterior shell. Anything is fair game. You can put it in the contract. I've had clients that are tenants that they rent a property unknown to them. There was a leak in the roof, and they're expecting the landlord to repair it. But I review their contract, and it says this is the tenant's responsibility, and there's not much we can do for them. If the contract says it's the tenant's responsibility, it is the tenant's responsibility. Generally, the tenant takes a commercial property as is. There's no minimum guarantee of what the property will look like. So it's really the tenant's responsibility to have inspections done and things like that to make sure that that the property is in good shape, or to make sure that the contract protects them in some ways. So that's kind of different from residential. In the residential, like I said, the tenant, the landlord is required to set a minimum standard for the property. You can't make the tenant responsible for the roof, for example, in a residential lease, but you can in a commercial lease. So I wanted to compare, just do a quick table comparing the two types of leases. So if you're investing in residential leases versus commercial leases, the lease term for residential is generally short. For commercial, it's long. For commercial, it's common to have a 5-year lease with 3 renewal options for the tenant. It could go up to 20 years. There's a lot of so that's one way really that they vary a lot. In terms of legal protections, there's a lot of legal protections for the tenant in residential, not so much in commercial. It's whatever the parties agree to. In maintenance, the residential properties, the landlord cannot delegate many things. They cannot make the tenant responsible for many things, but in commercial, they can. It's often that the tenant is responsible for a lot of the maintenance with the building. And one area in Florida in commercial leases that is really talked about a lot, that is discussed in terms of contract drafting, is who's responsible for the air conditioning system, the HVAC system. That could be very expensive to maintain and to replace, and it's often negotiated in the contract or specific provisions for that in Florida. So in terms, and the last thing is turnover. Like I said, the residential leases are generally 1 year or less, and commercial leases could last years, could last decades. For example, if you see a big box store, if you see a grocery store like a Publix, for example, they don't necessarily own the building that they're in, but they have a very long-term lease. And they invest a lot in the property, knowing that they're going to have it for 20, 30 years. That's not unusual in a commercial lease. So the next topic is just kind of changing topics completely. This is completely different. I wanted to touch briefly on 1031 exchanges, because that's important for real estate investors. So a 1031 exchange is a way to defer taxes. So generally, in order to qualify, it has to be a property that's held for business purposes or for investment purposes. You cannot use a 1031 exchange to do personal use property, or like a second home, or even your homestead. You can't do it. So what is a 1031 exchange? You could sell a property and then buy a new property without having to pay taxes on what you made on the first sale. So how does it work? Just to give you an example, to throw some numbers on there, you buy a property for $100,000, and then a year later, you want to sell it for $250,000. I'm simplifying things, but generally, you would be responsible for taxes on that $150,000 of profit you had. So if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to pay the taxes immediately, you can do something called a 1031 exchange. There's a qualified intermediary like ourselves. They would hold the money. When you sell the property, they would hold the money. And then you have 45 days to pick a new property to buy, and 180 days to close on that new property that you buy. And then if you do the 1031 exchange correctly, you do not have to pay the taxes on that $150 of gain. But it is tax deferral. It doesn't save you taxes, it just defers the taxes. So that $150,000 of gain, if you sell the second property in the future, you will then have to pay taxes then, unless you do another 1031 exchange. without getting too complex in it, your basis in the property is transferred over. So it really defers taxes. It does not save you taxes long term unless you hold the property until your death. But generally, it'll help defer the taxes, so you do not have to pay the taxes right now on that profit. And then so some people ask, well, what's the point? If it's not saving you taxes, what's the point of doing a 1031 exchange? I like to think about it as a loan. You're getting a loan from the government instead of, so say the taxes on $150,000, let's say the taxes on that are $40,000, for example. You can pay that $40,000 now, or you can pay it some date in the future, maybe a decade from now. Um, and there's no interest on that money. The taxes would be the same whether you pay it now or you pay it 10 years from now. So a lot of people would rather keep that money and not have to pay it now. So that's generally a 1031 exchange. And there's kind of a brief summary in the slideshow of what it is. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. It's kind of hard to explain. So then kind of changing topics, again, I wanted to talk about another type of investment. It's vacation rentals, or also called short-term rentals, and sometimes I'll abbreviate it as STRs. So Florida, again, is pretty friendly with short-term rentals as a state generally. They did pass a law in 2011 that says that any county or municipality, so any city or county, cannot prohibit vacation rentals or regulate the length of a vacation rental. However, that rule does not apply to any rule which was already on the books at the time that this statute came out. So from a practical standpoint, vacation rentals and short-term rentals in Florida vary from city to city and from county to county. So if you want to buy a property and do Airbnb or VRBO, you really have to look at the rules in that particular county, in that particular city, to see whether it's allowed or not, or what's not allowed. For example, I went through and highlighted the biggest cities here in Tampa Bay, where I'm located. I also did the two main counties. So a property may be in the county of Hillsborough, but not in a city. That's called unincorporated Hillsborough County or unincorporated Pinellas County. So the rules for Hillsborough and for Pinellas are for those parts of the county which are not in a city. They're not in the city limits. I just want to reiterate that for all of these, if short-term rentals are allowed, they still generally require you to pay a business tax, which is relatively low, around less than $100 for the year. They also require you to pay taxes like if you were a hotel, like vacation taxes. And it also most of the time requires you to register with the county. So Hillsborough County, Hillsborough, if you're in unincorporated Hillsborough County, so you're in Hillsborough County, but it's not the city of Tampa, it's not the city of Plant City, then generally the definition of a short-term rental is anything under 7 days. So if you rent over 7 days, then you do not fall under the short-term rental rules. You're okay. So you can rent week to week, and things like that. So that's kind of one way to get around the Airbnb rules, is just rent it for 7 days or more. Anything under 7 days is only allowed if the property is zoned to have it. So generally it'll be, where hotels are allowed and things like that. Anything under 7 days, you have to check to see whether zoning is allowed. So for the majority of the county, for the majority of unincorporated Hillsborough County, you have to follow the 7-day rule. If you want an Airbnb, it has to be for 7 days or more. You can't do anything under that. So the city of Tampa is different. They define a short-term rental of anything under 30 days. So it's pretty strict there, and anything under 30 days is only allowed in certain zoned areas. So even if it's under 30 days you want to do it, you'd have to check the property ideally before you buy it to determine whether it's a short-term rental is allowed in that area or not. The majority of the city of Tampa, it's not allowed. So Pinellas County, so unincorporated Pinellas County, so parts of Pinellas County that are not in a city. And Pinellas County has a lot of cities. There's a lot of, especially on the Gulf Coast, on the beaches. There's a lot of cities, and they all have their own rules. I just covered the biggest areas here. So unincorporated Pinellas County, a short-term rental is anything under 30 days. But they have an exception, which is nice. You could rent for under 30 days up to 3 times a year without having to follow the short-term rental rules. So basically, you can Airbnb it 3 times a year. So if you have, like, for example, a vacation house that you come visit and you stay in, but 3 times a year you want to rent it, you could do that without having to follow the rules. Or you can rent it for more than 30 days. So in Pinellas County specifically, in addition to the business tax and the hotel tax, you do have to get a certificate of use from the county, and generally they have to do an inspection to approve it for safety. In the city of St. Petersburg, a short-term rental again is anything under 30 days. So anything under 30 days has to follow the short-term rental rules. Additionally, they have the same exception as Pinellas County. You can rent up to 3 times a year without having to follow the short-term rental rules. But anything over the three-time allowance, three-time a year allowance, you have to follow the hotel rules and be zoned correctly. And then out of all the big cities here in Tampa Bay, Clearwater is the strictest. Generally, a rental under 31 days in a residential area is not allowed. There's no exceptions in Clearwater at all. So that's the rules from the city of Clearwater. But again, it's really, when you're buying a property, it may have a Tampa address, but it may be an unincorporated Hillsborough County. It may have a St. Pete address or a Clearwater address, and it might be an unincorporated Pinellas County. So it's really important to look where it is and how it's zoned. For the most part, a residential property will have restrictions on short-term rentals in this area. So that's kind of all the main topics that I had. I'm happy to go in more detail and answer any questions that anyone has. Thank you very much. And I'm going to put my email in the chat so everyone can send me an email if they want a copy of the slideshow. And I'll also put a link to the website where the slideshow is available as well.
Thank you, Felix. I just have a question. How the zoning, how often do they change the zoning?
The city has a future plan for zoning. I don't think it changes very often. I would say
Okay.
once a decade. For the most part, they keep it the same. You could seek exceptions and things from zoning, but I haven't really seen it done for short-term rentals. Anyone getting
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And where can we find that map?
where can you find the map, you're saying?
The zoning map.
Yeah, so each city and each county will generally have them on their website. So it kind of varies from city to county. But then also, so the easiest way to find out your zoning is go to the property appraiser website. And you could, it'll show you what you're zoned for there. I can kind of walk through on if you think that'd be helpful. For example, this is I'll share my screen again. So if you go to Hillsborough County Property Appraiser, this is the property appraiser's website. So if you're looking into buying a property, for example, you can go to property search and you can type in your address. I'm going to type in my business address. This is my office. So in this page, it'll generally give me the zone.
Yeah.
You see zone PD, commercial class, use code CO1B. You can click on this and it'll tell you what CO1B is. So yeah, commercial class 11. So my property is zoned commercial, but it'll vary. So yeah, the property appraiser has a lot of useful tools for that. If you click on this map, you can look at other properties nearby to see if they have different zoning. For example, my neighbor here is a residential property, so I'm curious how they're zoned. So you can see, I can click on their property. And you see the zone is different. So this is the residential zoning. So I imagine, so neither one of our areas is set up to be a hotel or anything like that. So for vacation rentals for these two properties that I just showed you, we would generally have to follow the 30-day rule. We can't rent it for less than 30 days.
Okay.
So
Well,
that would
thank
be the
you.
great majority of the county.
That's good information, but usually what I suggest also is just talk to an attorney like Felix before you, if you have a question, even for leases, eviction is always better with a professional. It's hard to do by yourself. You think you're going to save money, it's not the case. And if you have questions, yeah, especially on property, commercial and leases, and just ask the advice from a professional. It's always better, so you don't have any mistakes afterwards.
Yes, I
Any
agree.
question?
It's such a big investment that it's really not worth taking a shortcut on it.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when you do also the 1031 exchange. Before you do that, just talk to your CPA and your attorney. So, yeah, well, thank you. Any questions, Sean?
So we actually don't have any questions in the chat, but I just saw Felix dropped his presentation slide. So if anyone right now with us want to click on that, you can have access to all of the slides. If you don't mind, Felix, as well. Oh, sorry, my camera is off. If you don't mind, Felix, as well, what I will do is that I will grab this link and I will post it in the email that goes out to all of the people that subscribe. And that will be also on our website, the replay on the under the news section. The replay is available, and on our YouTube channel, probably today or tomorrow, depending on how the download goes. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm sure people will contact you because a lot of people wanted to get on today and something happens. I said, don't worry, it's recorded. So good.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much, Felix. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Charles, for being your good moderator always, as usual. And thank you for being here. Paola, thank you from Spain, well, Florida to Spain. It was nice seeing you and hope to see you next time. Where do you find info on commercial investments? We have one last questions.
Yeah, it just pops up. Where do you find info in commercial investment?
If you mean like what opportunities are available, I would talk to Betty Kappa. She's a commercial real estate agent. I think that's a good
Thank you, Felix.
to start. We'll probably help you find out, what opportunities are available, and then if there's any legal concerns about those opportunities or legal questions, then I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Okay, thank you and take care.
Everyone.
Have a good rest of your day, and see you next month for next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.